What kind of stories help you fall asleep best? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy these quiet nights, subscribe for more. Now, let your thoughts settle, and we'll begin. I found the notebook while cleaning out the drawer I never opened. You know, the one with batteries that no longer fit anything, rubber bands hardened into brittle shapes, and pens that only write in ghostly gray. It was wedged beneath an old charger, and a postcard I never sent. The cover was soft, once black, now grayed by time. The corners curled like autumn leaves. I recognized my handwriting before I even opened it. That particular version of my own script that belonged to a different season of my life. Sharper and more certain. Inside, on the very first page, a list. Things to do before the end of May. No year, just that title. I don't remember writing it, but the items were mine. Each one was a small reminder of the person I thought I was becoming, or maybe the person I was afraid I might never be. I sat down on the floor with it, legs crossed, the dust of old habits settling around me like quiet snow. There were 12 entries. Some practical: buy new running shoes. Call Aunt Mira. Others were gentler, stranger. More revealing: go sit at the riverside bench alone. Send that thank you letter, even if it's late. And one near the bottom: spend one whole day without pretending. I read them again, slowly, and for reasons I didn't quite understand. I didn't feel shame, not regret either. Just a soft ache, like hearing a song you once loved but had forgotten the name of. I wanted to hold that version of me, the one who wrote this list, and tell them it's okay that most of these things never happened. That sometimes not doing something doesn't mean it was lost. It just wasn't ready yet. I tore out the page, not to throw it away, but to begin again, not from scratch, from pause. I placed the list on the kitchen table, smooth and visible. Then I made tea, and while the water boiled, I drew a soft line under the first item. Buy new running shoes. Not because I wanted to run, but because I had stopped running from things, and that felt like the right place to start. I didn't go straight to the store. I walked, slowly, letting my steps fall without rhythm, without aim. The sidewalk beneath me hadn't changed. Same cracks in the concrete. Same familiar bakery door that squeaked exactly once when it opened, like it still needed to announce a presence. Nothing about the street had shifted, but I felt different on it. Not like someone going somewhere, but like someone being gently invited back. The sun was quiet that morning, not boastful. Just warm enough to remind me that time hadn't passed me by. It had waited patiently, like a coat hung near the door. When I reached the store, I hesitated outside. I looked through the glass and saw the soft rows of boxes, the faint reflection of fluorescent lights on polished floors, the quiet shape of someone behind the counter wearing headphones and not in a rush to be noticed. I stepped in slowly, no urgency, just air and shelves and shoes waiting to be chosen. I moved past the new arrivals and the running brands that meant something to someone else. Then, in a corner, a pair caught my eye, soft gray with a hint of blue, nothing dramatic, just calm. Like they had been made for walking at your own pace. I picked them up, sat down, placed the box across my lap. I didn't open it yet. Instead, I remembered why they had been on the list at all. It wasn't about exercise, not about discipline or goals. It was about believing I would one day move through the world lightly again. I hadn't been ready then. I hadn't trusted my own steps. But now, sitting here, holding this simple decision in my hands, I realized I wasn't walking to prove anything. I was walking to remember how it felt to belong inside my own rhythm. I paid for them quietly. The man at the counter glanced up, offered a polite nod. Maybe he knew, maybe not, but it felt like something had been exchanged beyond the transaction, a kind of permission. At home, I placed the shoes by the door, not as a reminder, as a welcome. The first line of the old list had been crossed not to satisfy the past, but to greet the present. That night, the list sat on the kitchen table again. My eyes fell on the next item. Call Aunt Mira. She had never asked for anything, but she had always answered when I needed someone, even without saying so. I wasn't sure she'd pick up, but if I could return to this list, I could return to her too, not because I owed her a call, but because I still carried the echo of her kindness. And maybe it was time to say something back. I dialed her number just after 8, as the sky began folding into evening. The city was slowing down, street by street, and I liked calling people when things felt quiet outside, like the conversation could stretch its legs without bumping into noise. The phone rang twice before I remembered she rarely answered unknown numbers. I was about to hang up when her voice slipped through. Hello? It was her, unmistakably. Softer than I remembered, as if the years had gentled the edges of it. I paused a second too long. Hi, Mira, I said. It's me. Silence on the other end. Not cold, just surprised. Well, she said slowly. Look who remembered my number. Her voice wasn't teasing, just warm, familiar, like she had been holding space for this call in a drawer that hadn't been opened in a long time. I've found a list, I said. Old things I was supposed to do. You were on it. A soft chuckle. Was I high up or near the bottom? Second, I said, just under buy new shoes. She laughed, truly laughed. And in that sound, something inside me relaxed. Not guilt, not apology, just breath. I'll take silver, she said. How are you? I told her honestly that I didn't quite know, but that I was better than I'd been, that I had found an old version of myself, and instead of running from him, I was walking with him a while. She didn't interrupt. She never had. That sounds like progress, she said, the kind that isn't noisy. We talked for 27 minutes. I didn't look at the clock, but I counted them by the way her voice flowed between memory and silence. We didn't say anything grand. She asked if I was eating well. I asked if she still made that lemon tea with the honey cubes. We laughed again. I asked if she wanted to meet sometime soon. She said, whenever you're ready but no pressure, some things are better left slow. I promised I'd call again. She said, you don't have to, but you can, and that was it. We said goodbye, like people who never really left each other, just paused. I sat for a while after the call ended, my phone resting on the table, no rush to move. No need to cross it off the list just yet. It wasn't about completion. It was about return, and I had returned. I read the line again that morning. Spend one whole day without pretending. It was scribbled between two more typical tasks: clean the windows, cancel the gym membership, but it stood out like a whisper written in a crowd. I must have written it quickly, without thinking, or maybe it was something I'd heard and wanted to remember. Still, I had no memory of ever actually trying it. What does it mean, really, to not pretend for a whole day? I didn't wear anything new that day. No watch, no scent, no shirts that say, "I've got it together." I didn't rehearse what I might say to the barista or correct my posture in the elevator mirror. I just left the house quietly and let the day begin me. It's strange, at first, not performing. You notice how many small lies you tell with your shoulders, your polite nods, your "I'm good, thanks." I walked to the park without headphones. The air was crisp, but not cold, and the city sounded different. Not louder, just more honest. The wind didn't rush. It just moved, like breath, with no expectation. I sat on a bench, not one I normally chose. This one faced nothing in particular. No fountain, no playground. Just a wide patch of sky between buildings. And I let myself sit as I was. Not productive, not impressive, just present. A child nearby dropped their toy. I didn't rush to help. I didn't offer an exaggerated smile. I simply watched, not coldly, but without the urge to fill every space. The parent picked it up, nodded toward me. I nodded back. That was enough. Later, I went to a cafe I'd never been to before. When the server asked how I was, I said, "A little unsure today, but present." She blinked, then smiled. Not out of politeness, out of recognition. Maybe no one had said something real to her all day. Maybe we both needed it. I didn't post a photo. I didn't check my messages. I didn't rush home. I walked through a few quiet streets just before sunset, my reflection passing softly through empty shop windows, and I felt light. Not fixed, not healed, just unarmored. That night, I sat at the table and looked at the list again. That line. I didn't cross it out. I just underlined it. Because I had done it maybe not perfectly, maybe not fully, but truly. And now I knew. Not pretending doesn't mean announcing everything. It means allowing what's real to exist, even when no one's watching, even when you're the only one who knows you're doing it. The next item on the list was one I almost skipped. Clean the windows. It sat between things I had already done and things I hadn't yet touched, almost apologetically. I read it twice, tempted to shrug it off. It felt too ordinary. But something about that word clean stayed with me. Not in the chore sense, more like the invitation to see things clearer. So, I chose a day with light in it. One of those early mornings when the sun arrives, not to impress, but simply to warm. I rolled up my sleeves, filled a small bowl with warm water and lemon, grabbed an old towel, and stood before the first window. The glass was streaked from weather, from months of letting dust settle and not minding it. I hadn't cleaned them in a long time, not out of laziness, really, just because I hadn't thought it mattered. The view outside hadn't changed a few rooftops, a narrow alley, a sycamore tree that leaned ever so slightly to the left. But as I ran the cloth across the surface, slowly, deliberately the light shifted, and I saw something I hadn't expected to feel, a kind of gentle clarity, not just in the glass, in me. There was something deeply calming about the motion, not rushed, not goal-oriented, just steady, circular, silent. The water in the bowl grew cloudy. My hands began to smell faintly of citrus. I cleaned each window in the apartment, not obsessively, but with presence. And as the outside world came into sharper focus, I realized how long I had looked at it through a layer of neglect, not disinterest. Just the way fog builds on a surface you see so often, you forget it's there. When I finished, I stood in the center of the room and looked out, and the tree looked a little greener, the sky a little taller, not because the world had changed, but because I had finally cleared the distance between it and me. I made tea, sat near the window, let the light pour in. It wasn't a transformation. It wasn't symbolic. It was just honest. A way of touching the space I lived in, of saying, I see you. I'm here now. I returned to the list with a calm hand and marked a small check beside the line. No flourish, no crossing out, just a quiet recognition that even the simplest things, when done slowly, become reminders that we're still choosing to show up. And sometimes that's all healing is. A cloth, a little sunlight, and the decision to see again. The line read, write the letter even if it's too late. No name beside it, no context. I must have known at the time of writing exactly who it was for. But now, years later, I wasn't so sure. Or maybe I was and just didn't want to admit it. I pulled out a sheet of paper, plain, unfolded. The kind you don't write on unless you mean to say something real. I sat at the table, pen in hand, and waited. At first, nothing came. Then slowly, like warm air rising from a cup of tea, a sentence arrived. I don't know what you would think if you read this, and I'm no longer afraid to not know. The words surprised me. I didn't try to fix them. I let them lead. I wrote in long lines, not perfect ones. I didn't try to make the letter impressive. I tried to make it true. I wrote about the time I said nothing when I should have said something. I wrote about the apology that never found the right hour. I wrote about the way memory changes shape when it's left unspoken, how it turns soft or bitter or unfamiliar. I didn't ask for anything, not forgiveness, not answers. I just wanted to place my voice somewhere outside of me, to see what it sounded like when I wasn't trying to hold it in. At one point, I paused and looked out the window. The tree outside swayed lightly in the breeze, not strong, not weak, just continuing. I smiled, not because anything was better, but because I had remembered that not everything has to be received to matter. When I finished the letter, I didn't sign it with my name. I simply wrote, from someone who stayed silent too long. I folded the page once, then again. I didn't place it in an envelope. I didn't check an address. I didn't plan to mail it. I placed it in the drawer beneath the kitchen radio, next to a few old receipts and keys that no longer open anything. Not hidden, just left. Like a stone beside a path, not to mark territory, but to say, someone passed through here. And they meant it. Later that evening, I returned to the list. The line was still there. I didn't cross it off, but I drew a small circle beside it, open-ended. Because even if the letter was never read, the words had been released. And that was enough. That was more than enough. I waited until the wind felt right before I went. Late afternoon, the sky still held warmth, but the air had softened, like the day itself was exhaling. I walked the longer way to the river, not because I wanted to delay, but because I wanted to arrive slowly. Years ago, I had passed that same bench so many times, always glancing, never sitting. It had always looked too still, too honest, like it could see through whatever face I was wearing that day. But now, I didn't feel like I had anything to hide. I found the bench empty. It was older than I remembered, paint fading at the edges, the wood worn where hands had once rested. I sat, letting the wood take my weight. It creaked gently beneath me, not in protest, but like recognition. Across the water, the opposite shore looked the same. Trees leaning slightly over the edge, ducks drifting in lazy loops, distant sounds of a city muffled by the slow current, and then nothing. Not silence as absence, silence as space. Space between thoughts, space between expectations. For a long time, I just sat. No music, no narration, no thoughts pushing forward, just air, just breath. I remembered why this had once been hard. Back then, quiet felt like judgment, like a mirror that didn't blink. But now it felt like grace. A place where I didn't have to carry anything I didn't choose to hold. A leaf floated past on the surface of the river. One small motion, unbothered, no urgency. And for the first time, in a long time, I felt the kind of stillness that doesn't ask for resolution, only attention. I took out the list, folded in half, gently worn now from being carried too often. My fingers found the line. Sit alone by the riverside bench. I didn't cross it out, didn't mark it at all. I just read it again and nodded. Because I was here now. Because sometimes the way we heal isn't by finishing something, but by returning to it with softer hands. I stayed until the sun dipped just below the line of trees. Then I stood slowly, gave the bench one last look, and walked back through the quiet that no longer scared me. I carried nothing in my hands, but I felt full. The list was nearly complete now, not in the sense of being finished, but in the sense that it no longer felt like a question I hadn't answered. I had read every line, sat with each one, walked through it. Some I had checked, some I had circled, others I had simply acknowledged. That morning, I unfolded it one last time. The creases had deepened. The paper felt warm from having lived inside pockets, been held with unsure fingers. I read it again, not as a challenge this time, but as something familiar, a soft echo of a self I'd once hoped to become, and maybe, in parts, already had. Then, without planning it, I turned the paper over. On the back, I wrote a new line, not as a continuation. As an offering, make a new list with no deadlines. I smiled gently. There was no ceremony in it, no symbolic gesture, just truth. I folded the paper and placed it in a drawer, not to forget it, but to let it rest. I made tea, sat by the window, let the light settle into the room without telling it where to land, and I thought about how long it took to realize that unfinished things are not failures, they're invitations, that we are not the sum of what we complete, but the rhythm of how we show up again and again, quietly, kindly, Later that day, I took a fresh page. No heading, no goals, just space. And I began writing not what I needed to do, but what I hoped to feel. Wake slowly. Say one honest thing. Notice something I've seen 100 times. Be kind without a reason. It didn't feel like a to-do list. It felt like a way of remembering that I am here, that I've been here, and that I can continue not as someone who is finally better, but as someone who is simply more present. The original list, the one from all those years ago, had done something unexpected. It didn't remind me of what I'd failed to do. It reminded me of who I've always been trying to return to. Someone who notices. Someone who pauses. Someone who, even in forgetting, still cared enough to write it down. And now, slowly, gently, I begin again. Not to catch up, just to continue.